$32 trillion. That's how much national debt we have as a country. A number so big, it's practically meaningless. That's $96,000 for every man, woman, child, and infant in this country. Imagine getting a newborn and getting a tax bill for $96,000. Imagine running your household budget like the federal government runs today. Imagine making $5,000 a month and then spending $7,000 every single month. And when you run out of funds, you put the difference on a credit card. So every single month of every single year, you're piling $2,000 worth of debt onto your credit card. When you get to the max on your credit card, you just go apply for another credit card. In the federal government's vernacular, this is essentially like raising the debt ceiling. You allow yourself to borrow more money than you were able to borrow before because there was a limit. This is what the federal government's doing every single month, spending $2,000 more than it's making and putting it on a credit card. Then every couple of months, Congress goes back, does this charade, and gets a new credit card that we then max out, and we do it over and over. So let's get into some examples of what this actually means. Did you know that the federal government owns tens of thousands of buildings that are essentially sitting completely vacant right now? We talked in the last episode about how 95% of federal workers right now are not coming into work and how that may change. There's a congressional report that showed that vacant properties cost the government $1.7 billion a year to just maintain. Right? This is to heat the properties, to keep the water on, to make sure that they have security and that they're maintained. This isn't even looking at selling those buildings and turning them to productive use. This is basically just saying, this is what it costs for us to just maintain these buildings that nobody's actually working in. Here's a second example. Conferences gone wild. We've seen government conferences. In one infamous case, there was a federal agency that spent $800,000 on Las Vegas retreat that included clowns, mind readers, and a souvenir commemorative coin that they created for the conference goers. If they wanted to waste money, they could have just bet it on red or black at the roulette table and probably gotten more enjoyment out of that than creating their commemorative coin. Third example, there was a recent report that found that the government pays billions of dollars every year to defense contractors for essentially nothing. Projects that either never get built, are delayed, or they change their mind on. If you were to hire somebody to build a house for you, and they show up with a bunch of sticks, and then you're like, oh, I changed my mind. I'm not going to build a house after all. But here, I'm going to pay you for all these sticks that you just showed up with, right? Is that the contractor's fault, or is the government just wasteful in their spending? Fourth example. So Medicare recipients last year received $28 million in additional payments that they weren't entitled to receive. And normally, if let's say, for example, I pay my electric bill twice, the company kind of tells me, hey, you paid your electric bill twice, and now I can say, oh, you know what, I'd like a refund for that. But in this case, the money was spent, it's out the door, and essentially now we're never going to get that back. And this just keeps happening over and over again. This is not a problem that's just one time. It keeps going on and on. Here's another example. The IRS commissioned a new software program that they wanted built. They spent $12 million on new software that was never implemented. It's just sitting there unused, collecting virtual dust, essentially. And these are just a number of small little things I was able to find by just looking at government reports of things that have radically gone wrong. Maybe you've heard of even crazier examples. Drop them in the chat and let's start a conversation and see who can come up with the most ridiculous inner workings of the government and how it's not working. So let's kind of take a look at how Elon Musk and a company like Tesla does things differently. What if Tesla ran the treasury? I have here behind me a mock-up of the Tesla Model X. This is actually the second Tesla that we ever bought. The first one that we bought, my wife got a Model S in the year 2013. Actually, it might have been 2012. And I was actually kind of nervous to get this car because it was going to be our second electric car. And my concern with it was the same one that I'm sure many of you have, which is range anxiety. What if you're driving somewhere, right? And you run out of charge, what do? There's not a ton of charging stations, or at least there weren't that many back in 2016 when I bought my Model X. But what was really shocking was actually on one day, I had probably what you would consider to be the worst experience that a new electric car owner could have. It was a particularly cold day in the winter. And I ended up driving, I think it was to Ann Arbor. Then I went to a place in Detroit for a client meeting, and then I was coming back north. So I did kind of a triangle, and it was going to be about 250 miles. And my car at the time was going to go about 270, 280 miles. But anybody that drives an electric car in the winter can tell you on cold days, your range does not last as long as you think. So as I was driving back home, I'm realizing, okay, it's going to be about 40 miles to get home. I start the trip, it says I have 45 miles of charge. And as I'm getting closer and closer, the charge is ticking down faster than miles. So as I'm getting close to kind of Great Lakes Crossing and coming up on Clarkston, Houston, I'm realizing I'm probably not going to make it. I dial up Tesla and I call my Tesla person that helped me with the car. He says, I'll tell you what, I can see exactly where you're at. Why don't you pull off at Great Lakes Crossing? There's a Sam's Club there. Pull off in the parking lot, go in the Sam's Club, use the bathroom, whatever you need. I'm going to call a tow truck and I'm going to have them meet you there. I get out of the car. I stop the car, I go inside, go to the bathroom. By the time I'm coming out, there's a tow truck there already waiting to pull me up on the tow truck. And I said, wow, this is fantastic. So the guy comes in, he says, hey, I'm so sorry. He says, I got here as fast as I can, so I didn't have a chance to change. I said, well, what were you supposed to be wearing? He says, well, Tesla contracts with us and they insist that we wear a suit when we pick you up. And he says, so please, when they call you, tell them that I'm wearing a suit. And he said, and I only had a chance to kind of grab some stuff on the way out because I wanted to get here real quick because it's super cold. So here's some water. So he hands me 2 bottles of water, right? We pull up the car, I sit with him in the cab and he's taking me home, which is only about a 10-minute ride at this point. The Tesla guy keeps texting me the whole time. He's, hey, did the tow truck show up? Yes, it did. Hey, was the guy wearing a suit? Yeah, he was wearing a suit, right? Did he give you some water? Yes, he gave me some water, right? Then the tow truck guy from Tesla drops me off. We unload the car, park it in the garage. I plug it in. I thank him and I say, what's this going to cost me? And he says, nothing. Tesla paid for all of it. I said, well, why would Tesla pay for all of it? And he said, well, Tesla's figured out that range anxiety is like the main culprit for why people don't want to buy electric cars. So they figured that they would take this really painful experience and make it into a good one by saying, if this happens to you, we're going to cover it the first, second, and it turns out the third time too, right? Now, I don't know if Tesla still has that program today. There's tons of charging stations all over the place. But it gives you a great highlight between the difference on how the government operates and how a private company like Tesla operates. And so if we could take that example and learn from it and say, how would Tesla run the federal government if it was running it? And I think there'd be one major difference, which is Tesla would treat us as their number one customer. Everything it does is essentially trying to serve us. Whereas the government doesn't really treat us as a customer, it treats us as a subject. Like you are a citizen, you're a subject of the government. And I believe if the government treated us more like a customer, they would be much more efficient in running their operation. So to conclude, the national deficit isn't just a number, it's our future. It's the way that we run our government. If we took some cues from companies like Tesla, how would they do things differently? Would they allow people to work from home where we can't even track what they're doing or how much they're accomplishing? Would they allow buildings to just sit empty where nothing's being done and we're spending $1.7 billion? Would they be ordering software and then not implementing it like we saw with the IRS? I'm quite excited to see what happens. For our next series, part 3, we're going to tackle the ideal government. Essentially, what if we could have government 2.0? What would that look like? And how would it look if we had a government that was efficient, that was prudent, that was thinking about us as not just subjects or citizens, but rather customers, and was focused on making our lives more efficient, simpler, safer, better, faster? How would that government function? Comment below if you have any things to say about this video, and we'll look forward to seeing you at the next one.